Oh, there we go. Welcome to Microsoft Forms, the hidden gem. It's unusual for me really to talk about something like forms. I normally talk about SharePoint, I normally talk about Flow and PowerApps, but forms for me is one of those hidden things that people don't really exploit to a huge amount, or they just start to play with. It's almost a little bit like Sway. Until you realize what it can do and what the use cases are for using it, then you don't really get the best of it. So what we're going to be going through this evening is Microsoft Forms. I'll introduce myself properly first of all.
Just to make sure, we're just seeing your desktop, or at least I'm just seeing your desktop. If you have a presentation open, it's not on the right screen.
Right, okay. Let me go and try and change that. Right, okay.
Yep, can see the PowerPoint now.
Can you see the actual presentation?
Yep, you're on the Microsoft Form, the hidden gem.
Okay, cool. Now you should see my grinning face full screen. Is that okay?
We do.
Okay, happy days. So I'll introduce myself properly first of all. So my name is Matt Weston. I'm an Office 365 and SharePoint consultant from the Midlands. I'm from an area called the Black Country. So if you do detect a slight accent, please don't call me a Brummie. I'm definitely not a Brummie. I'm from the Black Country. I've been working with Microsoft technologies ever since I left university, so back in 2004. And over the years, I've slowly aligned myself more and more with Microsoft. And so I've gone through a number of the certifications. So I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I recently qualified as an M365 Enterprise Administrator Expert. That's a real mouthful once you've had a drink. And I'm also quite proud to say that I'm a Flownaut. So I spend a lot of my time in the Microsoft Flow community, and as a result, I've become one of the community super users. There's a few of my contact details on there, so I guarantee that as soon as I finish presenting, you'll have loads of questions. So please feel free to reach out on any of those mediums, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that we have going forward. So what we're going to be going through then over the course of the next 50 minutes or so is really looking at what is Microsoft Forms, getting under the skin of it a little bit and just going into how it works, what the use cases are, how we can use it, how we can build certain solutions with it, and really start to look at how it integrates with other areas of Office 365. Because for me, that's one of the big areas that it's, one of its biggest advantages is that it's not a standalone product in its own right. And again, that seems to be one of the misconceptions about Microsoft Forms. We'll actually look about how we can utilize it throughout the rest of the application suite as well. And then what we'll do is we'll have a quick look at Forms Pro, which is the next version of it, the premium version, and we can look at how they differ and how you can start to utilize some of those advanced features as well. There are going to be plenty of time for questions. Please do jump in with questions as and when you have them. I can't see chat at the moment because PowerPoint's taking up my screen, so please unmute yourself and shout, Matt, I've got a question, and I'll pause at that point and I'll answer it. Don't wait till the end. So first of all then, let's look at what Microsoft Forms is. So Microsoft Forms it's a very, very lightweight survey tool. That's the easiest way I can describe it. That's the way I describe it to a number of my clients. And when I describe it as a survey tool, I always try and describe it as something that they're familiar with. So a lot of customers will go out and pay out for things like SurveyMonkey, where they're paying additional licenses, and usually what they're doing is just using it for internal surveys and internal questionnaires. So I start to try and make comparisons in that way. It's very, very, very simple to use. Note the three verys there because it really is a tool that almost suits the rest of what Office 365 is trying to do, where it's trying to pull together a number of business user tools that anybody, regardless of the level of IT literacy, can pick it up and do something with it. It's there to collect responses, and then once we've got those responses, to visualize the data. Although I put in brackets there to a basic level, we're not looking at Power BI style dashboards on the back of it, but we do have some dashboards where we can look at the answers and do some basic visualization around it. And it allows us to create forms and quizzes, and I'll talk about those both of those types of form in just a moment. So when can we actually use forms? And I'll start off by looking at forms first of all. So forms themselves are designed to be your very, very simple forms that you fill in. It could be a survey, it could be attitude, it could be say that how have we done, or it could actually be for just capturing information from a user. Now, I like the term capture information from a user because it makes it opens up the scope for what we can use forms to quite a wide scope, really. It's designed for simple forms, and I'll talk about some of the real use cases for this in a moment. And really, when we want an external response from a user. Some of the examples where I've actually used this, I've used this for, and I still use it for my own call for speakers solution, where I'm capturing some basic information from a user, I'm sending it external to my environment, so I don't necessarily have to have people logging into my environment to complete the form, or I don't have to pay any license costs for people to come and use it. And we'll look a little bit more about what the alternatives are to that as well later on. So those are forms, very, very simple ways to bring in user capture from a user. On the other side, we've got a quiz. Now, as soon as I mention quizzes to any of my customers, the first thing that I get is those strange looks going, why on earth would we want to create a quiz? And yes, I've used this in some of the more sort of informal methods. So I've used it for a Christmas quiz, because what I can do is I can define some questions, I can define what would determine a correct answer, and then I can score based on that answer. So it allows me to have that quiz style feel. If I put it more into a business type of setting, I've used it for confirmation of understanding. So where I've, for example, done training, I've always used forms as a method of gaining feedback at the end of the module, as an example, to make sure that people are understanding what we're doing. So I've also used that on computer-based training, where I put a video up, a training video, and then used Flow, again, just to confirm understanding of the users. On a more personal use of it, I also use it for technical testing. So when I have new consultants come and start to interview for the organisation I work for, the first thing I will do is I will sit them in front of a quiz which I've created in Microsoft Forms, which is designed just to do that, to assess their technical understanding and answer some basic questions. The nice thing is that because all of what we're doing within Forms gives me a real-time response, it means that I can get my results, I can quickly scan through them. So by the time I've walked into the room with the candidates, I've then got something to talk to them about. I can talk to them about the answers that they gave. So it's really actually quite useful, even from a quiz point of view, to actually really use forms in our day-to-day lives. But when we start talking about forms and we talk about what we've used it for, so for example, where we're doing the user capture, where we're doing things such as going external and getting people to fill forms in, the first real question that comes back is, well, why aren't we using PowerApps for that? So let's actually do a little bit of a comparison about forms versus PowerApps, because there are use cases for forms, there are use cases for PowerApps, and this will hopefully help just to understand where those differences are. So first of all, let's look at what Microsoft Forms is. It's easy to get started. Let's look on the other side. PowerApps, yeah, that's easy to get started as well. So far the two products are the same. But when we start talking about how long it actually takes us to create something or to actually get to grips with what the technology is, Microsoft Forms really has a shallow learning curve. There's not really much on there you can do, which means there's not really much you can do to get lost. So from a user perspective, especially from an end user point of view, it's quite advantageous. PowerApps, I always argue, has a shallow learning curve to start off with. But when you start to add any sort of complexity into a Power App, the curves really start to become quite steep quite quickly. So Microsoft Forms has that advantage where you know what you're getting and it's quite a linear path to actually go and create something. Microsoft Forms has a fairly static design, and we'll see more of this when we actually get into the product itself. So there's not very much I can do to make it look pretty. There's more I can do now than I ever have been able to in the past. But when you compare the flexibility over the design within Canvas apps in PowerApps, PowerApps does have the advantage there. We don't have dynamic content. So I can't connect it up to a data source. I can't go and draw information from one place and then bring that into my form, whereas I can with PowerApps. But what I can do with forms, I can accept external responses. And notice I put in the brackets there, it's without additional licenses. Apologies, I've got 2 chocolate Labradors who are about to kick off by the sounds of it. So I can accept external responses without any additional licensing. Whereas if I want to do the same with Canvas apps, I can't do that at the moment. So Canvas apps currently aren't available externally at present, although it is in the roadmap for that to come. I can do certain things using PowerApps portals, where I can make things externally available and then capture input. However, we're looking at additional licensing for that. So let's actually go and look at what forms looks like. Let's create some basic data interactions there. Let's create a form and a quiz. And then we'll have a look at how we can actually share those forms as well, just so that we can start to get people interacting with them in different ways. So hopefully you'll be able to see my browser. Can everybody see my browser, or can you just see the PowerPoint presentation still?
Still the PowerPoint.
Still PowerPoint, right, okay.
Yes, we can switch it out.
There we go. I'm getting to grips with this now. I'm getting there. Okay, so forms. What I'm going to concentrate on first of all is the version that you get with Office 365. So this is part and parcel of your enterprise licenses. It's available across all the enterprise range. It's across all the small business licenses except for business essentials, I think is the one caveat to that. It's even available for first line workers, so in the F1 or the old kiosk licenses. So it's there for you to use regardless of what your license level is. So when I actually go into it, the first thing that I've got is I've got the ability to create a new form, and I've got the ability to create a new quiz. And we'll start off with a new form. So when I said that this is a very, very simple tool, effectively what you see on this form is what you get. So it's very much a click. It's very much a type in what your survey is called. Okay, so this is a demo that I'm doing for the user group. I can give it some basic styling, like I mentioned earlier on, and the styling really is limited to what I see around the outside and a color scheme. So if I go and click on my theme, I've got a number of preset themes that I can select. What I can do now, and this has only recently been rolled out, is I can go and customize the theme. So I can upload an image. Microsoft are really starting to push Bing again now, so I've got Bing search baked into my forms. So if I want to go and search for Scotland, then I can go. It will go away and it will find some pictures that I can use to put as my background. Now, the one bit of intelligence that I actually like about this image search is that it will only pull back images of a large size. So you won't have a 200 by 200 pixel picture brought back, which is going to really pixelate when it gets stretched across the back of the form. So let's go and select a nice picture of Scotland, and let's add that. As you can see, that applies to the outside. I can apply a color scheme, which will really just change the colors of the buttons and the borders. So I can go and apply, let's just go for black, because that's the only hex color I can remember other than white. So now I've been able to apply some basic formatting and compare that to PowerApps, where PowerApps I've got full control over the canvas. That's all I can do. But for a user, especially someone who's not au fait with the likes of PowerApps, that's a really, really good way of just being able to get some basic branding across your form. I can also add additional pictures to the title. So again, I can either upload from OneDrive, I can upload from my local machine, or I can go and use Bing Search and I can add a picture onto here. And now I'm starting to just build up a little bit of identity for my form. If I add new, so now I'm going to start adding questions. And the data types that I've got, again, are quite limited because it's really just concentrating on what do I need to get some basic inputs from a user. I've got the usual suspects. I've got text, and if I've got text in there, it will ask me what the question is. And then we can have an answer. Again, I can apply a picture to that if I want to. I can make it a long answer, which means that I've got a multi-line text field instead of a single-line text field. And I can apply some very basic validation to it. I can make it required. If I look at what else I've actually got on here, I've got my choices. So choices are the preset preset options that I can select for a picture, for a question. That could be multiple choice, or it could be radio buttons, allowing me to select just one item there. I can select dates, and it will then allow me to have a date picker where I can input a date. One of the most common things now that you see on surveys is the ability to take ratings. And I can have a rating level anything from 2 stars up to 10 stars, or on a number basis. So I've got some preset options again there based on the different data types. Now, one of the things that certainly a lot of my clients haven't come across is some of the more advanced types of input that you might be able to want to use on your surveys or your forms. And if I click on my drop down over on the right hand side, I've got some really cool things that I can start to use. I've got rankings. Now, think about some of the questions that you, or questionnaires that you might have filled in, especially on attitude surveys, where you're asked to rank things. So I can give it some options. And then what we'll see in a moment when we actually preview the form is that I can then change the order of these rankings based on what is most important to me. So that's something that is really quite useful to a lot of people who start to use this. But again, what is most common in terms of the forms that we fill in, and even some of the premium form tools, we've got the Likert scale. Now, if anybody, I don't know if anyone's actually come across the Likert scale.
Nope.
No. Okay. So the Likert scale is basically where you have a statement and you determine what your attitude is towards that statement. So, is Matt Weston wearing red? I strongly disagree. I disagree. I'm not really bothered. I agree. Strongly agree. That's what's called the Likert scale. So it's actually asking you what your attitude is towards a specific statement. So all of that I can now bring into forms as well.
All right. I didn't know it was actually called like that.
I'm assuming
that a lot.
It's pronounced Likert anyway. Me with my in my black country accent, I'll blame that if it's wrong. And then finally, Net Promoter Score. So Net Promoter Score is, again, it's a way of gaining feedback, but it's also done on a positive-negative calculation. So when I select your Net Promoter NPS, it's asking you, and you probably fill this in without really understanding what's going on behind the scenes. It's asking you, how likely are you to recommend us to a friend or colleague? That's the most common format for that question. And you rank it from 0 to 10. And then what's actually going to, once we fill this in a couple of times, we'll actually see calculations taking place because it takes the the negative responses from the positive responses, creates an average, and that gives you your average Net Promoter Score. And if you look at a lot of companies, they now actually publish that score out onto the web on their websites, because that is an overall score for the confidence and the attitude of their customers towards that particular company. So that is something that is that, again, people don't know it's there, but as soon as they get shown it, it then becomes part of their standard processes that they send that out at the end of projects and so on. So that's basically how you build a form. A couple of extra little things in there that we haven't looked at yet. I've got the ability to create sections. So I can have a section which is question 1 to 3, then we click next, and then I can fill in another section which is maybe towards a different category or a different topic of questioning. Again, if I go back to my call for speakers form which I use, I've got a section which captures information about the speaker. I then have a second section which captures information about the session. Now, when it comes through to me, it just comes through to me as a list of questions. But from a user point of view, it means that they're not being faced with a massive screen of 100 questions. It's actually broken down into topics which make sense to them. If I go and create a section, you can see here, this has now been broken down into section 2. And if I decide I actually want my question 6 to be in section 2, I can use my up and down arrows to move my questions around. So there we go, nice and simple. That's how we can very quickly create a form. So how does that look to a user? So if I click preview, I have 2 views available to me here. I have a computer view, so that's what people see when they're accessing this from a desktop. And we can see here, I've got my picture, I've got my title, I've got my description, and then I've got my questions. The one which we couldn't really interact with previously was the rankings. So you can see here, I can move my rankings up and down, so that when I actually submit my questions, then the person who's taking the outputs will be able to see how people have ranked different options on different questions. Down the bottom, I've got my next, which when I click next, I forgot I turned my validation on. So when I click next, it will take me to the next page, and then it will allow me to submit. The alternative version is I've got a mobile version. So because this is designed, just like everything else with Office 365, it's designed to be accessed as seamlessly on a mobile device as it is in a desktop or a browser. So this is how it actually appears on a mobile device. Now again, that's actually quite a nice little feature that straight away within the Forms application, I can do testing, I can make sure my questions look right, I can make sure that this is going to work in the way that I want it to before I eventually go and share it. So click back, and I'm now back at my designer screen. Before I go and look at quizzes, let's just have a very quick look at how we can share this now that I've actually created a form. Because I've created a form, what's the point in having it if I can't get anybody to actually fill it in? Now I've got this share button up in the top right corner, and I've got some again, it's all designed to be end user based, so I've got some very simple options. I've got a send and collect responses, and only 2 options around how I can collect those responses. It could be anyone with a link can respond. That means that I can send a link to this form, and that can go to anybody in the world, and those people can fill it in, and it comes back as an anonymous response. What that means is that it won't track any user information, so it won't track your email address or anything else like that. So if you do use this and you want to capture email, make sure that you include that in your actual form itself. Or the default option is that only people in my organization can respond. So this means that only people within the tenancy can can fill in that form. So it's doing some basic validation around the user who's accessing it. If I send that external and someone who's not part of the tenancy or tries to access it, they will be prompted to log in. If they can't log in, they won't get access to it. But what that does track is it does track UPN information. So interestingly, a lot of the time people push these surveys out as being anonymous to internal users to get feedback. Let's take a basic example of what do you think of your manager? People respond to it thinking that it's anonymous, whereas it's not. It's actually capturing basic user information. So it's always worthwhile just understanding what the different behaviours are between the two different sharing options. I've then actually got a number of ways that I can get that link out. And the first one is obviously, as you'd expect it to be, it's a link. And that link is used in a number of different ways, and we're going to see that coming. We'll keep coming back to this link throughout the presentation because we need it in a number of different places. But I can send that out via email, I can send it out via Teams, whatever medium I want, I can just send it. It's a clickable link, and it will return, and it will bring it that person into the view or the responding version of the form. What's quite common now is QR codes. So I can generate a QR code which contains the URL for that particular form. I can include that that QR code on again on an email, on a business card. I usually do it on a presentation as well. And then when that QR code is scanned with a mobile device, it will open up the browser on the mobile, and it will allow that user then to complete the form. I've got some basic ways of being able to embed this as well. So I can generate automatically, again, I keep harping back to being business users, being not, especially the lower end of the IT literacy scale. If they've got the ability to take some code that's already been written for them that works and just put that into a web page, then they have the ability to use that form or embed that form in as many places as they particularly want to. And then finally, I've got the ability to generate an email. So that's actually just opened up Outlook on my machine. It's created an email with a link that directly to that form, the same link that we saw here. So it's trying to make it as easy as possible for users to be able to get that information out. So now that I've got information going out, let's actually just quickly fill this in, and let's take some responses back, and we can see how all of that then comes back into a basic dashboard. So let's fill that in. And if I submit, now if I come to my responses tab, am I actually being too quick, or is it because I've gone through a preview? Because I'm trying to cheat, I'm trying to go through a preview. So let's just copy that and let's fill it in properly. Feel free to tell me off saying, Matt, stop cutting corners. So again, let's just put some dummy data into here. Okay, so now, if I come back to my responses, let's just refresh it. There we go, I've actually got 2 responses now. So it counts the number of responses. One of the things that I find quite interesting is the average time to complete, especially if you're looking for answers that are of more detail. How much, you can use that as a way of sort of gauging how much time those people have spent actually completing these parts of the form. Or is it taking so much time for people to complete the form that you maybe need to scale the questions back or make the questions a little bit more targeted? So it's good for you to be able to take that information and then start to analyze how your users are interacting with your form. I can look at the responses, or at least the latest responses. So it gives me averages. If I'm taking ratings, it will give me basic ranking information. So what's the highest rank, what's the lowest rank? Statements. Where are people sitting on the that was on the Likert scale, and your Net Promoter Scale score. Obviously, both people who filled that form in weren't particular fans of mine, and so they're actually classed as detractors, which means that they've got a slightly negative view on what I'm doing. So that gives me a very basic overview of what those responses are. If I want to dig into more detail, I can view the results, and then I can actually go through each one and look at what they've put for each question. And notice here that because this was actually being shared internally to a tenancy, it has tracked my username. If it was an external one, this would come back as anonymous. And if I want to, I can delete the response. Maybe I'm going to play with my stats a little bit, and I can delete responses, or I can print them and it will open it all up in a print-friendly window. So that's how I've managed to create a form. Quite often, regardless of whether it's a form or a quiz, and we've still got quizzes to look at in a moment, it may be that I actually really like this form and I want people to use this as a template. Now, this is where really some of the form's functionality still needs a little bit of work. It's still lacking a little bit in here. Because if I want to share a template, what I have to do is generate a duplicate link, which I then copy, and then I send that to other people to then use that link. And if I fire that link up, then it opens up my form, and it says duplicate this form and start using it as your own. So you click that button, it will duplicate it, and then it becomes then editable by me, and I can start to use it. So there's still a little bit of work that needs to be done there just to be able to share it easily with another user. And really, the same thing can be said for sharing and collaborating. So if I want to share this form, so for example, if myself and a colleague are collaboratively working on this, i.e. we're both working on different sections or different questions, then we can't just go and press share and then send a sharing link automatically like we can within SharePoint. We have to come here, again, we have to generate a URL, which I then have to share or physically send to my colleague in whatever medium I choose. And let's see how this works if it's me. And then that person gets access to the form. Yeah, so it's a little bit convoluted in terms of having to create those links in order to actually share that. But what it does say here is that users with an Office 365 work or school account can view and edit, which means that I can share that with another O365 user, or I can lock it down so that only people within my organization can view and edit. Now, the disadvantage to this is that anybody with that link can then go and start collaborating on that form. And I'll talk to you when we look at how we integrate later on. I'll show you how you can lock that down to just a specific group of users. So if I do have someone who shared a form with me, I've got my forms, which are the ones that I've created, and these belong to me. I've also got this shared with me. And what I'm going to very quickly do is just fire up one of my other browsers. I'm going to go and generate a collaboration link from another user. And I'm going to paste that into here. So this is a feedback form, which I've now accessed by using the URL. And now if I come back to forms and I look at shared with me, I now have any forms that I am collaboratively working on. Yeah, so again, one of the things that I think is really lacking here, but I'm hoping will come, is the ability just to share, and it automatically appears in the shared with me tab. without me having to go and find the URL and follow the URL to start with. Group forms we'll come to later on, but that is basically allowing you to attach a form to an Office 365 group. And like I say, without taking too much of my 5 minute integration, that's what we'll look at in a moment. So very quickly then, let's just have a quick look at how we create a quiz. So a quiz is working exactly the same way. I can still apply some theming, I can still apply exactly the same customizations that I did before. I can still create my all my data types, and I can still create sections. Let me go to one that I've already created. So I have my Simpsons quiz here. If I look at the questions, I can see what a question is. I can determine what the correct answer is. So if I come and edit who is Bart Simpson's dad, I can mark what is the correct answer. So if someone puts Homer Simpson, then they'll get a point, and the point weighting is here. Or I can select multiple questions, and it will then allow me to select multiple correct answers. Yeah, so really quite a cool way of being able to get a basic quiz up and running. Likewise, I can have my textual box, and I can determine what I'm looking for in terms of the correct answer. So in this case, if the answer contains Lisa, then it will mark it as a correct answer, and again, it will give it a single point there. Let's go and submit that, and I'm going to be a boffin, and I'm going to go Homer Simpson, and I'm going to go Lisa. So I'll submit that. I can, as a user, I can then go and view the results. I've still got click happy, and I've selected medical answers as well. But you can see there, it shows me what I got wrong, it shows me what I got right, and it shows me what my overall score is. And in this case, I got 1 out of 2. If I look at my responses, I can then again do some basic analysis on what have people got right, what have people got wrong. Again, when I've used this for taking feedback during training, it's been a case that I can see where people are struggling most, and then I can try and head off some of those areas that people maybe need a little bit more help with. And again, I can print and create summary links from there as well. So 2 very, very basic examples there, a quiz and a form. You saw how simple that was to actually put together. So for users, once they start to get to grips with this, they really do start to enjoy using this technology. Right, I'm going to skip back to my PowerPoint presentation for a moment. Can everyone see the PowerPoint presentation? Have I got this right now?
Yes.
Cool. Has anyone got any questions on that before I do move on to the to integration?
I can see that you have Microsoft Stream there, so I don't know if it's coming, but can you actually embed a quiz in Microsoft Stream?
You can, yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So yeah, what we'll actually talk about now is how forms can be used across the rest of Office 365. So really what we've looked at the moment is quite a small, but only a part of the use cases that you could potentially start to use your forms. And where we talk about integration, we talk about how it can be used and how it can become part of other areas that you use on a day-to-day basis. So we'll look at how we can put it into SharePoint Online. We'll look at how it can be brought into Teams and how it can be used within the collaboration, because that's what Teams is there for. And we'll also look at how we can utilize it within Microsoft Stream, which only rolled out, I think it hit my tenancy about 2 months ago. So it's, again, in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively new. But again, until you know it's there, you wouldn't think to actually go and look for it because it's not obvious where it actually is. So let's go and back to my browser. And I'm going to go and grab my Black Country PowerApps link. And notice here that again I need my link to be able to start to use this integration. So let's go and have a look at SharePoint first of all. So let's fire SharePoint up. And let's go to my Scottish SharePoint 365 user group site. And obviously I'm now using the modern experience, which is where all of the latest innovations are going. One of those innovations, or one of those web parts that have now been introduced, is Microsoft Forms. And again, when the latest lot of updates rolled out from Microsoft Forms, this actually went from preview to GA, which was back in May. So it's there, it's now production ready, or as ready as production ready as anything Microsoft ever is, until we find an issue. But I can come into here and I can use the Forms web part to embed my form into my page. By clicking, I can either create a new form directly from here, or I can go and add an existing form. And like I said, I needed to grab that URL first of all, because what does it ask me for? It asks me for the web address. So let's go and pass that lovely web address into the web part properties. But it does give me the option of determining what the behavior is that I want from the form. So is this, for example, an internet homepage where I want to get feedback from users, in which case I can collect responses? Or is it an external facing form and I only want to show the results from my form? So I've got the ability to use either of those. Let's go and collect responses for this. And let's go and publish that. And there we go. I've now got my form, exactly as it would appear normally in the browser, now part and parcel of my web page. And again, just like everything else within the modern experience, it looks absolutely seamless. It looks like it belongs there. So very, very easy for users to take that form and use it across a number of different areas within SharePoint. Let's go and have a look at Teams. So again, Teams allows me to pull together information from a number of different places. So if I come to my general channel and let's go and add a tab on there, and again I've got a Forms tab ready and waiting for me to actually start bringing my functionality in. Exactly like SharePoint, I can create a shared form from here, or I can add an existing form which actually has a slightly nicer, and Teams always seems to be slightly ahead of what SharePoint is. It has a slightly nicer user interface here because I can actually go and select all of the forms that I've got access to. And again, I can collect responses or I can show results. So let's go and show results this time, and let's go for the Simpsons quiz. So now that becomes part of my Teams channel. Yeah, I can now click on there, and when that eventually finishes thinking, it will show me the results. So when we talk about collaboration across Microsoft Teams, about pulling everything together into a single user interface, Forms fits the bill perfectly there as well, because I can bring it in to here, I can make it, put it at the fingertips of my users, so they don't have to go across the forms to be able to find the information or to complete the form. So the final place then is in Microsoft Stream. So within Microsoft Stream, I'm going to go and open up a video that I've uploaded. And I'm just going to quickly pause that because we don't want to watch Mac. But what we've got over here is we've got our transcript. So with your Enterprise E3 licenses and above, you obviously get the auto transcripting. But unless you actually go and look for this interactivity tab, it doesn't make it clear that when I click on this, it gives me the ability to add a form. But again, I need the URL. So let's go and add the URL in there, and let's name it. I'll call that my form. So that will then bring the form in that I've taken from the forms application, and it will make it part and parcel of this stream screen. The really, really nice thing that I like is that I can actually position it on the timeline. So I don't have to have it from on the screen from the moment that the video starts. It could be that it appears 2 minutes into the video after some key information has been given, or it could be that the video has a pause period in the middle where you want your people to go and fill in the form and respond to it. So I can add it to the timeline, and when I click add, it will come up. So if I go and continue to the video, and I click on my form, it's on the right hand side here. It then appears in the center of the screen. So I can then fill in my form, and then once I'm ready, I can continue to the video. Yeah, so it's actually now bringing that those additional methods of getting feedback on the video in a more constructive way than people just posting comments alone. And you can have multiple forms. You can have multiple forms coming in at different times. So it gives you, again, just that additional way of being able to get information from your users, getting that user engagement all the way through your videos. So I'm just going to come back to Teams for one last point. So what we spoke about, what we looked at actually in the Forms application itself was being able to collaborate, and we talked about collaborating via a link. So I have to send a link, it then appears in my forms. That's not really the way that I want to be able to work, especially if I've got a large team I want working on and collaborating on the creation of that form. So what would actually make more sense is if I could do something to that form that I could then bring into Teams is the ideal place to do it, where my users can go and they can work and edit that form. Now, just cast your mind back for a moment. When we actually went and added a form onto here previously, we added an existing form, and let's go and add that one this time. But the only option I've got is to collect responses or show results. So there's a step that I need to go and do to allow my form to be edited and worked on through Teams. So let's close that down for a moment. Let's come back to Microsoft Forms. Let's go back to My Forms. So for example, if I want my demo survey here to be edited by multiple people without me having to keep firing out a collaboration link, you can click on the ellipsis here. Now, I'll admit, it took me ages to actually find this ellipsis, because what I was trying to do was share or try to work on a form which had got quite a low contrast background, like what I've got on the Black Country PowerApps and Flow user groups form here. So I was always looking at the form going, oh, where is that ellipsis, until I actually created one which hadn't got a background. But when I click on the ellipsis, I can copy it, so that allows me to take my own copy of it. I can obviously delete, but I've got move. Now again, this isn't the best terminology for what I want to do, because when I click move, what it's actually doing is in form language, it's moving it to an Office 365 group or to become a group form. I prefer what I think it should have been is more just attached to a group or something like that, something that made it a little bit more obvious what it actually does. So now, if I actually come down and select one of my Office 365 groups, I can click Scottish SharePoint and Office 365 user group, and I can move it. So you can see that's now disappeared from My Forms. It's not a shared with me form because it's not one that I'm doing with a collaboration link. But if I look in my group forms, let's just refresh that and hopefully that will come up. There we go. So that form now appears as a group form. If it doesn't appear there, because obviously this is group forms, these are ones that I've recently interacted with, I can click on the drop down and then I can select from any of my other groups. I can still edit the form through here as I always have been able to. But what I want to do is come back into Teams, and let's go and add my call for speakers form in. Let's go and add an existing form. Notice that it's had the personal in brackets stripped off it, which signifies that it's a group form. So if I click on that and click on the drop down, I now have an additional option here. I have the ability to collaborate. So I can collaborate, I can hit save. And so now the actual forms editor comes directly into Teams. So again, no more having to go across into the Forms application, especially if we want to be having chats and looking at documents and all the other good stuff that we do with Teams. Again, everything is now at my fingertips. This also has the advantage that whoever is part of this group, whoever is a member or an owner of the group, gets the ability to collaborate on this form. So if I have 5 new starters come in, I don't then have to send a link to those 5 new people. I can just set their permissions on the team as I would with any other piece of collaboration that they want to do, and they will get access to be able to do it. So that's a really useful way of being able to do that without the link generation. Any questions on any of the integration aspects again before we move on?
Can you just repeat your last bit there when you say you collaborate? So if you put it in Teams here, so
yes.
Is there any permissions issues there?
As in conflicting, if two people are in there.
Yeah, so you took the example of you have new starters or things like that. So do you need to put this as collaborate for the people to actually fill the form, or can they change anything? Or
so if people have got the ability to collaborate just by making it a group form, if one of those new starters becomes a member of the team or of the group that has ownership rights over that form, then they will be able to go in there and collaborate on it. They'll be able to edit it. We can still open up the actual response side of the form to everybody else. It's only the collaboration side that's actually affected by this.
Okay.
Hi, Scott here.
Hi, Scott.
I just wanted to ask, once you move a form into a group, is there any way to get it back? The reason I'm asking is we actually had this situation the other day where we've been encouraging staff to move forms they've made into groups where it's not going to be completely lost and inaccessible if someone can't get to it.
Yeah.
However, we found out that Flow can't interact with group forms, and we had a form stored in a group that needed to be connected to a Flow, and we had no way of getting it back. I was wondering if there's like a trick to it, or if it's just something that hasn't been implemented yet.
It's something that's not been implemented yet, to my amazement. So I can copy it, but I can't do anything else with it. All I seem to be able to do is just delete it. Yeah, you can take it one way, but unfortunately you can't take it another. The only way that I see you actually being able to get that back is to generate your duplicate link.
Yeah, that's basically how we ended up doing it. We had to copy it back onto a kind of a shared user account that multiple people had access to in the end.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things that I did find earlier when I was actually looking at something similar is there is a way, if it's a user that's left, there is a way of taking control of that form from the user. And I'll dig out my notes in a moment to actually go and find what that link is, because you can. Let's actually see if we can find it. So if I come to my forms, it might still be cached. Yeah, so you can use the delegate page, and you can use the original owner and then put their UPN afterwards, and that will this will come up saying it's not a disabled user because it's still an active user. But that will do is it will show you a list of the forms that they've got, and then allow you to transfer them or do something with that form. The only the thing that I'll draw your attention to is that they only last in that area for 30 days. So it's a 30-day recycle bin before it eventually gets deprovisioned. So if you do suspect that people have got those forms, then and you know that they've left, always have it's probably worthwhile building that check into your leaving process to make sure that they've got no forms there.
That's great, because we did actually have we've had a large sort of shift around in staff recently, and we've been getting kind of inundated with requests to recover things left, right, and centre. So that's partly why we're kind of trying to prompt people to make more use of groups and put things where other people can get at it, and it's not restricted just to you. But yeah, this is kind of one of those areas where actually we're probably giving the wrong advice out at the moment. There doesn't seem to be a massive amount of information out around a lot of these little features. I had to spend a lot of time digging around to see what my options were, and I think it was by luck that I actually come across that URL. But it's an interesting point that you've raised. I'm conscious of the time. Just very quickly to answer your question about group forms not playing nicely with Flow. No, they don't play nicely. Certainly, they don't tend to interact that well when you actually try and select the form from the forms trigger. But if you do take the form ID, let's go back to forms. So I can take my form ID and I can use that within a form trigger if I use it as a I forgot what the terminology is, where you customize your own customized entry that goes in there. Yeah.
So if you don't take one of the preset options from the drop down, go to customize it, put your own ID in there, and exactly the same with get form response, and then you will see that it will start to play quite nicely. It's just not friendly to be able to do it that way.
Yeah, I mean the issue we had was it's not a centrally maintained one. It's some users who aren't too IT savvy, so yeah, we had to find a way that was all primarily done within the user interface for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I keep sort of going back to there are certain things that aren't quite there for the business user. That there is still some work to do on this.
Yep, that's great. Thanks.
Cool. So the final thing that I'll give you a quick look at is Forms Pro. So Forms Pro it's the premium version of Microsoft Forms. Obviously, being premium, you get a little bit more functionality to actually play with, such as it will do more in-depth analysis on some of the answers, that are brought back. So it utilizes things like sentiment analysis. It looks at different ways of being able to share, and gives you an improved dashboard, including word clouds and so on, based on what people are how people are responding to your questions. It's quite a good tool. Unfortunately, it's not free. I think for an Office 365 user, it's roughly about $100. If you're using Dynamics, then off the top of my head, I think it's free. It's part and parcel of the Dynamics package. So it is there, and as far as I'm aware, it's still preview, so you can still register for a preview license around this. And it's worthwhile just having a look again just to see exactly what those differences are. So very quickly, let's go and grab my other browser. Can you see Forms Pro on the screen at the moment? Or are you still seeing PowerPoint?
No, your Forms Pro.
Perfect. So let's have a look at what I've got here. So I've got the sentiments. All I put on this one is a very simple question. What did you think of this? And the actual form builder itself is it's exactly the same as Forms 3. I've got a little bit more styling that I can do around it, so I can do some basic formatting around the text. The actual questions themselves, no difference in terms of the data types. But when I look at my responses, it does give me some more in-depth information. So I've only got one question on here, and it's given me some sentiment insight, which, because this is still seems to be previewed, doesn't seem to work all of the time. But it will give me a positive and negative sentiment for what my questions are. I can look at what the overall is. And if I go to my responses, let's just go to view all. And what it will do is it will give me some basic dashboards as well. So these are areas that I still see as being very much in progress because they don't necessarily seem to work that well. I did say that there were some additional ways that we can send out, that we can generate these forms and send them out. And I can, again, I've still got email, I've still got the ability to embed, and we'll look at that in a moment. I can still generate a link, I can still generate QR codes. I've got some flow templates that I can create, which will, based on something happening, and it's usually something happening within Dynamics, then it will automatically send out the survey for me. If I look at embed, I've got a number of options to do embeds. So I can actually go and embed this as a pop-up somewhere. I can embed this as an inline, or I can embed this as a button somewhere. And I can generate the code. So all I have to do is take that HTML, put it onto a web part or whatever else that wherever else it is I want to put it, and it will immediately start working again and get people filling in my form. So some quite good advancements within Forms Pro. That just mean it's a little bit more mobile than what Forms 3 is. Just very, very quickly, if I come and load up a Power App, they're now starting to bring forms into PowerApps as well. So if I come in and fire up PowerApps, I should have loaded this beforehand. What we've got on the controls menu now is the ability to insert a form. So on my inputs, right down the very bottom, I've got Forms Pro Survey. So I can now have my survey directly inside a Power App alongside any other things that I may want. I've got a survey selector, and I can go and select my survey, and everything seems to be on a bit of a go slow tonight. There we go. That's now part and parcel of my Power App, so I can then use that alongside all of the other good stuff that I can normally do within my Canvas apps. So you can see that Forms Pro, they are very much becoming integrated across quite a large number of different solutions. So really just quickly to summarize, I'm aware that I've just fed quite a lot of information about Forms to you. Hopefully some of that is new to you. But just to summarize, Forms is part of your Office 365 license. If you want to go to Forms Pro, then you're looking at paying the premium licensing for that, unless you're already with Dynamics. It's a simple tool used for forms and quizzes, and again, simple, lightweight, something that a business user can pick up and run with. And as we've seen, it can be integrated with numerous other applications across Office 365. So it's not just a Forms solution, it's not just a SharePoint solution or a Teams solution, it's an Office 365 solution, because everything works alongside everything else. Cool, and I can breathe. Any questions on anything we've gone through?
Guys, if you have any questions, just unmute yourself.
No, okay.
I have one.
Oh, go for it. I thought I got off light then.
Yeah, just one. I could see when you were on Forms Pro that you have environments. Is Forms Pro part of the Power Platform?
Not directly, no. Although it's interesting that it does appear there, and I think it only appears in PowerApps purely because it's embed with the Dynamics family. And obviously Dynamics is the thing that has really driven forward the Power Platform.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's only because it's been adopted by the Dynamics communities that it's now actually become part and parcel of PowerApps. Because otherwise, I think we'd have seen forms, the normal forms appear there as well.
Okay.
Cool. So I'd just like to thank you all for, number one, letting me present to you this evening. Thank you, Veronique, for accepting me. I hope you've all taken something away from that. If you do have any questions, again, there's my contact details on there. I'd be happy to answer anything else that you might have. Or if you need any help in the future, feel free just to ping me and I'll be happy to help.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Matt. That was great. I mean, I don't personally use forms, so except the first 5 minutes, maybe everything else was new.
Good.
Right, let's get going. So thanks for letting me talk tonight. I've got my notes to say it's many years I've been up to Scotland, so it's almost a shame it's a virtual session and not a chance to come and say hello, but it does work better for my wife and 3 kids. It doesn't leave her looking after them too much. So what I'm talking about today is how you can scale up the usage of Flow for approvals across multiple libraries on multiple sites. I was looking at a new project a couple of months ago that wanted to use Flow for approvals of content across about 100 sites. As I was just saying there, I'm a big fan of Flow and it can be very useful. But I was a little worried that when we had the flow set up for each of the different libraries, that we would then have hundreds of different flows. And then if you wanted to manage those, how it will work. I looked for a few solutions. There was one from John Liu, but that involved using SharePoint Designer. And I'm afraid I just couldn't do that to myself or my clients on there. It was a SharePoint Online one, so I wanted to try and avoid that. So I thought about a few different things and came up with an idea, and that's what I'm going to show tonight. First, a little bit about me. I'm a solutions architect. I work for a company called CPS based down in Marlow in England. I blog at McD79, not anywhere near as much as I should do at the moment. I've been a bit slack there, but I do tweet quite a bit. You can follow some blog from my colleague Alan Erdley, who does a lot of user group talking, blogs quite a bit on CPS, but also follow me on LinkedIn and GitHub, and I will be sharing the code here at some point up onto GitHub, hopefully fairly soon, when I can find a little bit of time. I've been working with SharePoint since about 2004, and it's actually a project server implementation that introduced me to SharePoint. And I really liked the ability that you had with end users to build their own content and find their own way and learn their own different ways of doing things. And I was introduced to CPS then, the financial services firm I was working with engaged them. And 15 years later, after working with a few other financial services firms and then moving into development consultancy, I stayed in contact with CPS, heard they had a role going, and decided to take the plunge. Been there about 5 months and doing lots of Office 365 and SharePoint stuff. Anyway, back to Flow. Before we go on to talking about how we can use Flow with multiple libraries, I want to just show how you can use it for a single library and using it for setting up approvals and that. I'm going to assume a little bit of knowledge around Flow, so I won't spend too long on the absolute basics, but do pipe up. I have to admit at the moment I haven't got the chat window in front of me, so maybe for Veronique or someone, if there is a message on there, just shout out and I'll flip back to that and try and answer any questions. So I'm going to go into a demo now. Let's bring up the screen. Where's it gone? There it is. Can I check you can see a SharePoint team site now?
Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So just a very basic team site I put together last night, and if we jump and have a look at the Pages library here, you'll notice that with SharePoint now you get the Flow link along the top there. If we bring the drop down there, you've got the option to create a flow, see your flows, and specifically the configure page approval flow. If I click on that, you can see you pop over to the right. I'll try and make this just a little bit bigger just in case. Oops, it's vanished. You can see it's got the configure page approval, add a page approval flow to require approval before publishing. So it assumes you've got publishing enabled on your site, and you can set this up with approval. And if we click on Create Flow, it takes you through a couple of windows here. You can give it a name. So if we talk about this, not Scottish, SharePoint Online User Group, Flow Demo. You can add an approver. I'm just going to add Alan in this case. You can see some details. You look down here that the connections that the flow will use. So it will use the approvals connector, a couple of connections to SharePoint, and also some notifications by default. So it just tells you what it's set up, and it's saying they're all green, which is good. And so I can go ahead and create that. It'll take a little bit of time to create it. First time I did this, I kind of sat there wondering what was going on because it told me it had been created, but I couldn't see anything there. But if you go into Flow and go into See Your Flows, it will open up the flow window itself, and you can see here that it's created that Scottish SP&O365 flow demo that you can click on. And if I jump into that, again, for those who haven't seen Flow, you get a little bit of detail about the flow. You can add a description. It's created a default page flow on there. It's got the owner created on there. I hadn't noticed this until a few days ago. It may well have been there for some time and I just haven't picked up. But it actually tells you the original template. So if you do edit the flow, you can always go back and see what the original template was, which is quite useful. You can see the connection, you can see the owner of it, and you can have multiple owners, so you can share that with other people. You can also have run-only owners, so if you needed people to be able to manually trigger this, then you can set up users to do that. And once it's up and running, you can get a view on all the runs that have taken place, and you can go through step by step, which is very useful. We'll see that in a sec. For now, I'm going to go in and edit it. With Flow, you've got a starter trigger. And you can see in this case it's for a selected item. Because I've done it from SharePoint, it's already picked up the address on the top there. Could change it to another one. I'm not going to this stage. It's also picked up the list name a little bit frustratingly. It picks it up as an ID, which will absolutely work. But one of the things I like about Flow is that you can go back and you can make it easy to read. So I'm actually going to get rid of that. And select the enter custom value and just put site pages, which is the name of the list on there. Again, absolutely will work with the ID. It's purely to make it easier to read. The message there is that when you submit a page, and we'll see that in a sec, you can pass a note in the comments. So it's just picking that up as a property that you can use later in the flow. A couple of advanced options that really only let you limit the number of columns. Not a huge benefit apart from performance, so tend not to use that too much. Going down here, it's named this group of actions within the flow. You can group them together in a scope, and that allows you to manage things that happen after that, but is mostly used, I find, to group things together and make them a little easier to read. Because obviously you've got a nice simple flow there, you can see what's going on, and then you can expand and get some of the details. So it allows you to hide in some way some of the complexity. Given the file, obviously the page, the SPX page is a file. You'll be able to get the file properties. Again, it's got the library name there, and I'm just going to change that to site pages to make sure we know which one's which. You've got the ID that's come from the trigger, so because it's triggered on that item, we've picked up the ID there, and then we can pass that on and get the file metadata. So a little bit annoyingly, you can't get the file metadata directly from the file properties, so you've got two calls to be able to get the details. And the reason you need the details is because you want to get the status and that E tag that comes from there. And that allows you to then call this one, which sets the approval status to pending. So it makes sure that as soon as you kick off that request for approval, it puts it into pending. These are all standard SharePoint actions within Flow, so relatively easy to use on there and well supported and documented. Going on to there, you can then start an approval, and you can see again it's got the default. With the approval type, you've got a few options. You can have everyone must approve, so if you want it to go to a group, every one of those must approve before it goes on. The one probably used most is the first to respond, and that will give an approve or reject. You can also go into custom responses and have different actions that take place depending on those responses. So if you wanted something a bit more than approve reject, you do have the options to do that. Going on to the title, then obviously when you send this out as an email, you want to give it a subject and a header there, so you can pick up the title of the page itself and then add, in this case the default is requires approval for publishing. Who it's assigned to. You'll see the details there. If I hover over that, it's not always the easiest to read, but you can see it's just concatenating message sent with request, doing some clever stuff with URI component to string. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it is doing on there, but it's pulling up the text that comes from the trigger, and that's where I mentioned the message that comes through. It will include that in there. So I believe they're doing some formatting there. You can certainly drill into the details a little further. You can get the link, so you can supply the link back to that item, and you can add a description. The default that you get with the page approval is click here to review a page. All comes through nicely. Then go into condition, so this will be the response of that approval. If it's approve, yes, go down this slot to the left. If it's no, go down this slot to the right. Very similar setup across these. One goes in and sets a content approval status, much like we sent it to pending previously. This will set it to approved. You see you've got the approved there, and will include the comments as well. So when the person's replied, it will set some comments and get those there, and then send that out as an email notification. Other side, exactly the same, except you've got reject instead of approve on there. And then it will send a final email notification. The reason, you can see the dotted line there, this will be if something's gone wrong with the approval, that will only fire then. And you can see it's put some HTML into the body of the contents. You can do various other things with notification if you wanted to change it, but this is the default, so let's go with that for now. To show you what that looks like even, let's create a new page. So go into new, let's just call this page demo. Don't have to add anything to it, but let's take some text, demo text, and you'll see that the default behavior, if you've got this button to submit for approval. So I can click submit for approval. I'll have the option once this loads. I find this screen a little frustrating. I know that many users wouldn't really want to see this. They just want to go into it, but there's not really anything you need to add there. But you can add a note. So please approve my page to keep my boss happy. And you'll see that message come through. So that's now selected. If I jump back to the Flow window, you'll see that I've got there in the runs that something is running, and I can go and have a look, and I can see it's picked up the selected item. It's now in scope 2, and it's at the approval phase. Another minor grumble I have is while it's in approval phase, you can't click on that and remind yourself who it's meant to go to. You'd have to go back to edit and have a look at it. What I'm going to do is just open up Outlook in this demo tenant we've got. And you can see there, demo requires approval for publishing. And that's picked through. So where it picked up that file name, and again, it's got that title we set there, has come through in the subject. You can see we've got details. We've got the message that's come through of please approve my page. I can click on there to open the page. And the nice thing I like about this compared with some other items is that you've actually got the approval built in to the email itself. So I can say, sure, keep your boss happy. and I can submit that. So I don't actually need to go and open SharePoint. I don't need to go and put the page. You may see that as a negative. You may want to make sure that people are actually looking at things before they approve them, but you don't have to, and that can be very useful and embedded there. If I go back to here, you can see the approval's now got a lovely green tick. And I can actually see all the messages that have gone on here, all the details that have gone through. If I extend the condition, I can see that it was true, so it's gone down the yes route, crosses down the other one, so it hasn't gone down there. Content status is set to approved, and email notifications sent. And in fact, for some reason these are coming through my non-focus window, but you can see that your SharePoint demo is approved and published. Sure, keep your boss happy. That review has come through. So nice basic way of getting your page approvals. I can look at the list of pages and see that's approved. Ta-da! There is a nice simple way of doing that. So I'm just going to jump back to the presentation. Why would you want to do things with that? You can then extend that flow. You can start to look at multi-step approvals. On there, you could start to have it approved by your line manager and then approved by a central comms team as well. I mentioned you can customize the emails. You can use something called adaptive cards to really put your own brand within that email, to change the layout, change the contents that exist in that email as well. And you can also have connections. So you may want to fire off, for example, now you can actually get those approvals and put them through to Teams. So as you're trying to push people away from using email too much, you can have that put into a Teams channel, and anyone who's a member of that channel you can set as being able to approve that, and then they can do it directly with a very similar card as you see in the email, but built into the Teams channel as well. But it may be you want to capture some details, you want to fire off to Salesforce or another third party. If there's a connection in Flow, then you can do it as part of the approval. So that's all the good stuff about page approvals. What's the problem? Now, if you can imagine you set up that site page, create another site, you get another flow. Create another site, you get another flow. Create another site, you get another flow. And soon you've got too many flows and it's an ungovernable torrent. If you wanted to change that approval process, you've then got hundreds of different flows to update. You could write some scripts to go through and do that. That's certainly one way of approaching it. But you've still got a lot to manage, and you still, when you go into Flow, are going to see hundreds of flows, and trying to find the right one within there, or if you've got other flows, if you haven't got a decent naming convention, it's going to get a little painful. So just the number in there that are actually doing very similar things feels a painful way of doing it. So what was the solution that I came up with? The key to it is actually to use webhooks. Now, if you don't know what webhooks are, they're a user-defined callback made with HTTP. Some of you are developers, hopefully that will mean something to you, but really what it is where you have an API, a way of connecting in to a system. These are event-driven APIs. So when something happens, for example, a document's added, it will trigger a call to a different HTTP address. For example, another REST API. So you can go and call and make something else happen based on an event. And it's a cross-platform concept. This isn't just something that's in SharePoint or in Microsoft. GitHub supports it, although I guess that is part of Microsoft now, but other things like Stripe, many others support webhooks. So there's plenty of code and ways of doing it that you can handle with, whether you want to do it in Java, PowerShell, etc., etc. You can host a Node, for example. You could host your API that gets called by the webhook in whatever technology you want, effectively. What comes through from that webhook? Again, I just want to go a little bit of techie detail here, but when the webhook fires, it will fire a JSON message like this with the details. And you'll see I've got a link here. I'm very happy to share these slides later. But if you search for SharePoint webhooks getting started, you'll come up with the default documentation, and it goes through different properties that are sent through here. The key things really to note is that the resource is the list or library that you're getting the webhook triggered from. So you can pick up there whether that's site pages, whether that's document, that's where it triggers from. You've also got the web ID, so you know the site it's coming from. And interestingly, you've got the subscription or tenant ID. This is from a sample one, so they've both been set to blank, but you've got that ID of where they come from. So you could handle these webhooks with a single API, picking up from multiple different tenancies. So you could create something centrally to manage multiple ones of your tenancies if you needed to. It's also got an expiration date. The reason is that when you set up a webhook on a document library, I think the maximum amount of time, I don't know if it says there, no, but off the top of my head is 6 months. So it will only last there for a certain amount of time, and then you need to reapply that to make sure it exists. So it sends that date, and you can build into your process to reset that webhook automatically as well. What you might have picked up on is that I did say there that you've got the list ID, but there's nothing in the webhook notification that actually includes which item it is. So yes, I can get that it's site pages that's coming through, but it won't tell me that it's the demo page or the home page that's in there. To pick that up, there's another step in the process. You need to pick up the change feed. So for each list or site with the REST API, you can get the list here. So this is just saying get these site pages. And if you post to get changes, you get more JSON like this. And there you've got something a bit more useful. You've got the item ID, so you know the ID of the page there. And you've also got this change type. And there's an enum. I've got the reference there. I'm not going to pop it up at the moment. But basically that will give you a number that tells you whether the page was updated, created, deleted, whether a member was added. There's a list, I think, of about 20 things that tell you what comes through and what happens. But you've effectively got this two-step process. One, you need to get notified that something's happened. Then you need to go back to where that something has happened and say, okay, what has happened? Now, this get changes does actually bring back everything that's changed. I think there is a limit to it. It'll bring back, I think it's 100 items off the top of my head. And that's where this change token that's in the middle there comes in. So if you store this, when you call get changes, you can pass the token. And when you do that, you will get everything everything has changed since that token comes up. So you can therefore only get the changes that you haven't processed yet. So quite a lot of technical detail. Apologise if you're not a developer. I'm going to try and move away from that now. If you're a developer, happy to hang around a bit more at the end and show the code and go into a bit more detail. Or I will be posting up onto GitHub and can talk about it further there. So given that we've got the webhook firing, we need to put something in place to accept that webhook notification, that API. And the way I propose to do that is with an Azure function. So Azure functions, if you haven't used them, they're serverless compute from Azure. And what that means is you can run a bit of code in Azure based on a trigger. And serverless doesn't mean it's not on a server. It means that you don't have to manage that server. You don't need to be running a VM in the cloud or a local VM in there, and you don't need to be deploying onto that and managing IIS. It's just, I want to run my code. When I get a certain trigger, kick it off. That trigger could be a schedule events. You could have it a timer. It could run on an hourly basis, a nightly basis. It could come from an Azure event. So you could upload a blob into Azure storage, and that could kick off a function and allow the code to happen from there. In this case, we're actually going to do it from a web event. And effectively, it's like creating your own REST API, but for a single item. So you'll call the function. That will run the bit of code. Within that bit of code, that will go and call the change feed, go and get the item itself and get some of the details and process that. Now, I did find it took me quite a while to kind of get through all that change feed, get through what's coming up. Just as I did that, I managed to find a reference implementation, and hopefully I can pick this out there. No, because I can't copy and paste my notes. I'll share around on Twitter later, so it's at Kevin McDonnell. There is a reference implementation. If you look for SharePoint webhooks in the Microsoft Docs themselves, there's a link to it there. It's a little bit old. I think it's about 2 or 3 years old now, and it talks about creating an MVC app rather than an Azure function. There are some additional details that include the how to do it with the function as well. But it really is a guide. I wouldn't take it as an out-and-out source, but it gives you a guide on how to do things. So we've got a function accepting the webhook. I did mention at the beginning that we still want to use flow, so I haven't forgotten that, because what we have is the function will take that something has changed, and it will log it into a central list. So for your entire tenant, you can have a single list that will capture an approval, and then you can create the flow in the same way I showed a bit earlier, based on that single list. It can pull all the details, and what I do is take the information from the webhook that's fired in that notification, the information from the change feed. I also actually go up and look up the item itself and get some details on there. For example, who edited the page or who edited the document, what status is it in, capturing that list. And then when the flow triggers, you can actually then put in your own approval process. And so let's go back and have a look at that. Any questions? I realise I've kind of covered a fair bit there. Any questions so far?
Just one for me, just because you were talking about the webhooks there. So when I was running some PowerShell script, I was using webhooks with SharePoint and runbooks. Is there a difference between runbooks and Azure Functions?
Apologies for laughing at that question. It's a very good question, and something at CPS, there's 2 or 3 of us who have passionate views one way or the other. They are similar. There's a gentleman called Gary Trinder. He's actually part of the Office 365 CLI team, part of the community, shares a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he was one of the presenter, and I actually asked this question as well, but I want another opinion too.
So I think that for me they're very similar. I have to admit I've spent more time on Azure Functions, and I'm going to take my reasoning that I probably know Azure Functions more. If you're coming from a PowerShell background, my gut feel says the runbooks work a little better. They're more about scripting, they're more about running some code. If you're coming more from the developer side, I think functions will slightly suit you more. You can build them very easily into a deployment process. The other thing, and I'm trying to remember what Gary told me, as I say, I haven't got much experience with runbooks. It's something we keep saying we're going to sit down and blast through a bit. The other thing I think is cost. That with Azure Functions, you pay while it's running. So you make a web call, it runs for 1 or 2 seconds, you pay for 2 seconds. You're not paying for anything to run anything longer than that. You can run it in an app service and have it continuously running. You'll get a little bit better performance from it, and it will always be there, but you'll be paying for it to run all the time. For me, the consumption model of functions is great and can trigger there. So.
Okay.
I don't feel I've answered that question fully. I'm hoping I can come back at one point and be able to answer that. Again, I think in this case, runbooks may work just as well. You could certainly you could deploy this as a .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, REST API, and run it from that. It doesn't need to be a function. It just certainly worked best for me and gave that kind of quick, easy to deploy, easy to understand the costing of it.
Okay. Thanks.
But no, great question. Right, where are we? You should be able to see flow now. You can see I've actually shared this one. So my flows are ones that are only available to me. If I've shared it with anyone else, then it starts to appear in the team flows. And I'm going to go in and have a look at this. You can see I've been testing this a little bit more. So again, we have the same trigger. New items created, different lists. So I have the cross-site approvals demo list. In fact, let me just bring that up and show the approvals there. Show it for flashing between lots of different screens. So here you can see the approval list itself. I'll put in the title more because it's nice to have a bit of a summary to understand a little bit more easily what it is. I would say one thing I'd like to change is not just have the ID, but have the name of the item, so it's a little bit more recognizable. The client state is a unique ID that you generate. It allows you to sort of distinguish between the same post. To be honest, I've kind of hard-coded that at the moment and always set to that. I feel I should be doing something a bit cleverer with that, but haven't at this stage. Subscription ID, again, is the standard subscription you're using and the tenant you're using comes through, that expiration date and the resource. All of those items from site URL to the left all come from the webhook. We've then got the web ID, item ID, activity ID. All of these come from the change feed that we pick up, and then I actually go and call the details for the item itself and get the email for the person who's picked it up. And where we have that change type, I've converted it from the enum into the text activity, so it's easier to understand and view. And again, I trigger on that item. One more thing on this: when in the function, what I've actually done is made sure that if an item exists here already, don't update it again. Leave it in there. It means there's an approval running. Don't try and reset that. I think in my future things to look at, I'm pretty sure there's going to be scenarios where multiple approvals do come in and you want to handle that. Just where I've got it to now, I think this will evolve, and I see that as one area it will evolve. But for now, I found with certain webhooks, especially with site pages, that editing a page once can actually trigger about 5 different webhooks notifications. So to minimize the number of flows triggering, I actually picked that up within the function just to do some filtering on there as well. Within the flow, you can see I'm just initializing a set of variables. For example, the tenant URL, and that just makes it easier for me to deploy to different environments. I've then just got one place where it can be changed. A few other items that are set as blank and used later. But skipping ahead to where we get into there, it then gets the source list. So given the site URL that's come from the approval list and the resource ID, I have with a lot of these tended to use the REST calls within Flow. Now, I had some nerves from someone was a bit concerned that this would cost a lot more because you'd then be going into the next level of licensing with Flow. I don't know how much you know about licensing. If you're trying to make HTTP calls and not just use standard Office 365, you need to pay for a higher license. Thankfully, within the SharePoint, there is actually a block. In fact, let me just show that up now. If you search for SharePoint, just scroll down, there's a send an HTTP request to SharePoint. So as long as you're pushing it to SharePoint, it's included as part of your standard Office 365 license. There's not an additional cost. And that really opens up a lot more that you can do with Flow. Makes it a little bit more complicated in terms of getting the right REST URL you need in there, but it gives you a lot more capability. So this allows me to get back the source list details that it's coming from, and you can see using that I can set the approval item site URL so I know which site it's coming from. I then get the item itself from the ID and I can pull out some of the details there from the actual item that needs to be approved, and you can see that I pick up the file name with extension, so I pick up the file name from that detail there. One of the other pieces we found is that you sometimes want to process pages differently to documents. So for our client, they wanted to be able to approve pages and documents. So we looked at the content type. You can see there that we're just picking up the content type from there. The reason I've got a coalesce is that we found in some scenarios it didn't have a content type, and therefore if it's null, then it effectively comes to a blank and says no and follows down this route. If it does have a content type, you can see here that based on that content type, I've got 3 different cases. If it's a site page, then I can not only get the title, but it will have the description. So I can set those within there, and that will be a summary of the page, often the first bit of text on there. So very useful when it's coming through to approval. I mentioned the people approving without looking at the page. If you can at least put the header description, at least they see something on there. For a document, though, there's no description, so I'm just setting the title. And again, for the default one, actually treating it the same as the document and just setting the title. I start an approval, and you can see there I've got the title and description, so I'm manually setting the details there that comes through. Again, future stuff would be nice to kind of not even show description if it's for a document, and pick up there. I've got the link and I've got the title that comes through in that description email. If that's approved, going down this side, then I'll get the file metadata, very similar to the standard approval. I will mark it as approved. And then I'm using a slightly different, I'm using the Office 365 Outlook of just notifying the person who changed that and saying, yep, it's all been approved. Here's the comments, if any, all looks good. I'll come to that in one sec. If it's rejected, again, exactly the same as the other one, then I mark it as rejected and fire a notification to the user. And then at the end, I actually delete the entry in the approval table. So this entry should only exist while there's an open approval for it. And the reason for that is just to keep it as simple as possible on there. So let's go in and just create a new page. Just checking I haven't got anything called demo in there. No, let's call it Scottish SP&O365 demo. Excuse me. And I can submit that for approval. So you've got the same for the end user. I'd say the same, actually a similar experience. By not using the flow for each one, you actually get this simpler piece on there, and you can just add some comments on there. So it's a lot simpler and cleaner for the user. You can review the approvers, and you can actually directly approve it. So if someone wanted to go in the page, didn't need a notification, they could go and approve it here. But this is where I wish I'd made my sacrifice to the demo gods. If I look, hopefully it all runs. Let's just do a refresh there. Not quite in there yet. Let's just open this in a new tab and hopefully see. I know what it is. Sometimes I've had some failures and I've left the items in there. As I mentioned, if there's already an approval ongoing, then it won't try and trigger off another approval to bombard people. I did mean to clean that out before this meeting, so I do apologise. Let's edit that and then just resubmit for approval. Demo take 2. And with any luck, we would see something coming there. Oh, I love it when demos go well. So just give that a quick refresh. So you may have to trust me slightly that the item would come into there. Obviously something's gone wrong with my function. It may have fallen asleep and take a little while. If I just go back and have a look at some of the ones that have run previously. Again, similar items, we're setting up of things, it's got that source list, and you can see in this case the site address it's got from. It's coming back as a REST call, so not always the nicest one, but I can see from there it's got the full GUID, lots of complicated bits there. I actually take that JSON and pass it, and this gives you the content in a more easy to use way. And I can see from there that it's actually the item URL I'm picking up from the same site. So I know it's the same site there, and if I look at the file identifier, then the site pages I was using was the sample webhook trigger. So I know it's come through from that page. Again, it's gone through to start an approval, and it's stopped there. Hopefully, if I just open this in a new tab so I can keep that one there. With approvals, they all do appear within Flow itself, so you can always go into the Flow one. If someone wanted a central place to be able to manage every single approval, then you can point them towards here. And I can approve that from there. Again, similar sort of view. You've got the same card with the approval, the details that would come through in the email by default. With any luck, that is the one that I've got selected there. No, it's not. So I'm just going to go back and have a look at one of the other ones that successfully ran. So you can see when I was trying this a few weeks ago that I've got through approval. It's gone through the approval there. It's gone down the path of getting the metadata. So I can go and see all the details. I can see in this case it was the webhooks page I was editing. It's all been approved. Picks up that E tag, which allows it to reference make sure it's got the right update to it. I'm marking as approved, and it will all come through nicely there as being updated. And again, then deleting the item at the end there. Just hop back, give that a refresh, just on the off chance. No, it is well and truly dead today, just to wind me up. But effectively, that's where the piece goes, and no matter where you can apply it, as long as you set that webhook up, you can then put it through to that central approval list. Now you may be wondering, well, hang on, I need to actively subscribe to those webhooks. How do you do that? There's two ways. One, we've actually created a flow for provisioning. If I just go back to flows. No, apologies in the other tenant. We've got a provisioning flow that comes through, and that will create all the pages, and that actually, using that REST API, can create the webhook. So that's the way, as part of the site design triggers a flow, and that flow will then go on and, sorry for the background noise there, that flow will then go on and actually go and create those webhooks. But we also knew that sometimes you want to manage that directly. So one of my colleagues has been working on a SharePoint framework web part, and from here you can enter the site URL. He will shortly be updating it to give type ahead, but if we go through here, and I've also need to get it into a nice alphabetical order to make it find things easier, but we can select the cross-site approvals. We can select the list, in this case site pages, and you can view all the webhooks that exist on that list. So you can see here the functions that are getting called. I can see why it's not triggering, because I've actually deleted that function and changed it to another one. So that's why my things aren't doing, because I've been doing some updates to it today. But this is the function that gets called. And if you wanted to change that, we've actually built in the properties. You can change the functions URL, so that could be another REST API, could be your automation runbooks. You can set the URL to that, and it will just set that as a subscription. So we can go through and add that as a new webhook for any page on there. So if for whatever reason that provisioning process hasn't set up the webhook, then we can trigger it there. One issue that we haven't had to face, so haven't resolved yet, is if someone on a site adds a new library, maybe a new document library, how do you then cater for that? I don't know yet. That is something we're looking at, whether we can get a trigger on the site of a new library being created and then automatically add the webhooks to that. Because we haven't needed that for the client, it's not something we've hit yet, but certainly something in the back of my head that needs to be looked at. Just going to go and hop back to the presentation. Wanted to cover an alternative, because obviously there's quite a lot of code there, there's quite a lot of deployment. If that's not something you're comfortable with, it may not be that you want to go down that route. And also it felt like something that other people may have done. Now, I was at Future Decoded in London a couple of weeks ago, and I saw Chris O'Brien there, and was having a chat to him, and I asked him how they catered for that. And this was actually his solution, and I had heard that from a couple of other people as well. That you have basically a stub flow. So where I mentioned creating a flow for each of those site pages, you could still create that, and then it would call a parent flow where you would have all your approval logic. So then when you want to change that logic, you didn't have to change lots of different flows. You could just change a single flow in one place. So I did ponder this and thought, maybe have I wasted my time looking at webhooks and deploying Azure functions and things like that. But I came to the conclusion that even in that case, you've still got the issue. Yes, you don't have to update lots of flows, but you still have lots of flows in your environment. They're still clogging up when you go into flow itself and want to find things. You've still got lots and lots there. And you've got the issue of cost. The only way that you can call a parent flow is by using the HTTP connector, I believe, and therefore you're paying for the higher license. There may be many other reasons you have that already, and that could be removed as a factor, but certainly for our client that we're looking at, it was a factor. They weren't planning to use Flow particularly. It was only us driving it, so to insist they had an extra license for that didn't really fit with what they wanted. So just before I get on to any questions, what's next with this? Big thing. Want to publish it, want to get it onto GitHub, allow people to use it. I do have an Azure Resource Manager template, so it should be very easy to redeploy this. I'm doing a bit of testing in different tenancies to make sure it does pick up on that as well. And we'll be deploying it to different tenancies. It's just gone live with one client yesterday. We suspect there's a couple of other clients who'd like to use it as well, so we'll be pushing out up to them, looking at issues we face, looking at even more scenarios and starting to enhance it. And a great thank you for letting me speak tonight. Would love to get feedback, love to listen to, hear what your views on it would be, how we could enhance it. Certainly want to make it a community. We'll look to speak with the PMP team once we've got it to a good stage and get it up there and used, but we'll also be listening and hearing what others think. But otherwise, I will stop bending your ears and say any questions from anyone.
People, just unmute yourself if you have any questions. Well, I have one then. You know, going back to your slide where you had the parent flow and all these overflows, and you were talking about costs there. So even if you didn't have this HTTP request that you said you would have in the parent flow, then you would still have all the costs for all those flows, even if you were on the like a normal subscription, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were looking, what's it, I think 700 flows on a standard subscription, if you've got more than that with your number of libraries, you've got a huge number of those. So yeah, yes, I agree.
And those flows there are running into like a specific account, or do you put different accounts because you have like a, you know, the running per month as well?
So in this scenario on the screen at the moment, I don't know is the honest answer. I would have thought you'd have to put them into different accounts. Although I think if you've gone into the higher licensing level, then you've got more per month, and that becomes less of an issue. But that would be the yes. Again, I think that's part of the limitations. I think you would hit a scale issue in this relatively quickly. Certainly for bigger clients, you would hit a scale issue with this, and probably when you're least expecting it.
Okay. And how many flows can you associate to the parent flow?
I think as many as you want, because all you're doing is effectively the trigger for the flow is an HTTP trigger. So there's not a direct link between them in terms of flow. All you're doing within the stub flow is calling a web API, effectively calling to a web page, and that's or REST call. Excuse me. And that REST call is that parent flow. Right. So I don't think there will be any limitation to the number that could manage. I've never hit that many flows to know that if you tried to trigger 500 all at the same time, anything would fall over. I don't know. I haven't heard of that, but we would certainly want to test that.
So, and just last one question. So technically you are kind of having some nested flows there. Can you have like multiple nested flows? Like imagine your 4 flows there. Can you have like some overflows in the back of it or things like that? Or
yeah,
just too far-fetched?
You could have any path, because there's nothing that's within each of these flows that says the thing you're calling is a flow. It's just calling a web trigger that happens to be a flow. So you could have a path of 5 of these different ones. You could have a bit of logic in one, a bit of logic in the other on there. Again, then you're trebling the cost or the number you can run within that time, but there is nothing technically to say that you couldn't have any level within that.
Okay.
I come back to many moons ago, the first time we put Nintex in, and we found someone who'd created a Nintex workflow with, I think they got to 3,000 actions within it. And our comment was, we didn't know you could copy and paste, and the person says, I didn't. I've spent a week and a half manually creating each of the stubs on there. And it turned out it hit the limit. There was a limit within SharePoint workflow of the size of the document, and even the Microsoft support guide took quite a few getting through there because no one had tried going that high before. And that would be my worry with some of these things with Flow, that if you push it up too far, there'd be a limit that people haven't really considered would be an issue.
Yeah, I said last question, but that's my last question. So if you are using flows, but because you're going into your Azure functions and things like that, why are you not using Logic Apps?
The simple reason for that was if you're talking about an approval workflow, there's often comms teams and more business-facing teams, and Flow's a little bit nicer to show to them. It's not necessarily that they would be the ones creating the approval, or creating the approval flow, or going in and editing that. But often, if you wanted to sit down and talk through them, it's a little bit nicer in Flow. There is no reason why you can do that in Logic Apps. There's one thing nagging at the back of my head. The one slight advantage is obviously you can go into the approval list. What's it gone? That where you have that list and you can configure the flow there and have that kind of link between them. You could obviously manually do that within the Logic app as well, and could have that as part of the deployment process. There's no reason why not. The reason I went with Flow was purely the kind of more user-friendly nature of it, and the other one with the approvals, as I sort of see on the screen here, you could give business users access to this, and they could see all their approvals in one big go. Okay.
I was just thinking because you're obviously in Azure when you're creating your Azure function, so I was like, why not using the same kind of interface, I suppose.
Yeah, I did consider it. I mean, by the same token, you could build approval into your Azure function code as well, but then you've got very tightly coded ones. So it was purely the end user visibility was the driver to Flow.
Okay.
Although I'd love to know if anyone knows a way to bulk approve or reject. I'm up to about 270 in here from testing, and I can't find a way to bulk reject. So one thing that would be nice is a way to do that as well.
Anybody has any questions for Kevin? Nope.
No, I'm in the process of trying to do exactly what you're trying to do at the moment. I think that's really cool.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, as I say, I'm hoping to try and get out this week because I'm actually on a cub camp next week, so I won't have any access at all. So I will hopefully publish this code out and make it available as well. And I see Alan says, Melissa Hubbard has a post on bulk reject. Thank you very much. I have to admit, I haven't checked too deeply, but it's something I know I need to do to clear it up at some point, so I'll have a look at that. Lovely, thank you. Yeah, no, I follow Melissa Hubbard. I'm surprised I haven't noticed that one.
Okay, so in that case, I want to thank the people attending. Thanks for taking the time, and I want to thank the speakers, obviously. Thanks very much. I mean, I thought it was very interesting, both of you. And thanks for customizing the demo with the Scottish group. That's really cool. So yeah, thanks very much. If nobody has any questions, then I think we can just wrap this up.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyone thinks a question later, please do tweet me or send me a message. But no, thank you, Veronique, for having us.
No problem. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Thank you. You guys have a good evening.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.